Commander Gina rubbed her tired eyes as she stared at the glowing screens in front of her. She had been working the night shift at the Galactic Patrol Station for 3 months now, and most nights were quiet. Too quiet. But tonight felt different. The cool numbers dancing across her monitor made no sense. Energy readings were spiking from the edge of the galaxy, from places where nothing should exist. She double-checked the instruments, ran diagnostics, even slapped the side of her console like her old instructor had taught her. Nothing changed. "Hey, Vextar," she called out to her partner across the control room. "Come look at this." The tall, crystal-skinned Zephyrian floated over, his body shimmering with that weird light his people always gave off when they were thinking. His 4 eyes scanned the data, and Gina watched his expression change from bored to slightly annoyed. "Solar storms, probably," he said with a dismissive wave of his long fingers. "Happens all the time out there in the empty zones. Why are you even monitoring that sector anyway? Nothing lives out there." But Gina couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had grown up hearing stories from her grandmother about the old days, back when humans still remembered their history. Most people didn't care about that stuff anymore. Why should they? Humans had been scattered across the galaxy for so long that they barely remembered being one people. The Galactic Council made sure everyone knew their place. The Zephyrians with their mind powers controlled the rich inner worlds where all the good stuff happened. They could read thoughts, move objects without touching them, and lived for thousands of years. They were the natural leaders. Everyone said. The collective controlled the outer territories where the real work got done. They weren't individual people like humans or Zephyrians. Instead, they were connected through some kind of hive mind that let millions of them think as one. They built the massive mining operations and factory worlds that kept the galaxy running. The Nexari ran all the technology. They were the engineers and scientists building machines that seemed like magic to everyone else. Their ships could travel between stars in days. Their computers could predict the weather on a planet from 1,000 light-years away. And humans? Humans were just there. They lived on whatever worlds the others didn't want, did whatever jobs the others didn't feel like doing. They were like the galaxy's janitors, useful but not important. Gina's own family was a perfect example. Her great-great-grandmother had been born on Earth, back when humans still lived on their original world. But that was ancient history now. Earth was just another museum world, visited by school groups who wanted to see where the primitive humans used to live. The official story was that humans had simply spread out naturally as they learned to travel between stars. But Gina's grandmother used to tell different stories late at night when the other adults weren't listening. Stories about humans who had left the galaxy entirely, heading out into the dark spaces between galaxies for reasons no one remembered anymore. Fairy tales, Vextar had called them when Gina mentioned it once. Humans making up stories to feel important. But now, staring at these impossible energy readings, Gina wondered if her grandmother's stories might have been more than just fairy tales. The readings were definitely artificial. She had seen enough natural phenomena in her years with the patrol to know the difference. Solar flares had a specific pattern. Asteroid impacts looked different. Even the weird quantum storms that sometimes happened near black holes had their own signature. This was something else entirely. The energy output was massive, bigger than anything the Nexari had ever built. And it was moving, not drifting like a natural object, but moving with purpose, following a direct path toward the galaxy's populated regions. She pulled up the historical archives, something she hadn't done since her academy days. Most of the really old records were fragmented or corrupted, but she found what she was looking for in a dusty corner of the database that probably hadn't been accessed in decades. Theoretical human faster-than-light drive systems. The file was marked as historical curiosity only and dated from before the Galactic Council was even formed. According to the notes, human scientists had been working on something called a quantum fold drive that could theoretically allow ships to travel between galaxies. The energy signature described in those ancient files matched exactly what she was seeing on her screens right now. Gina felt a chill run down her spine. If her grandmother's stories were true, if humans really had left the galaxy 50,000 years ago, then what she was seeing wasn't just some random space phenomenon, It was them coming home. Station Commander Yuki was having the worst day of her career, and it wasn't even noon yet. The morning shift reports showed 3 cargo shipments delayed, a minor reactor leak on level 7, and now her communications officer was staring at his console like he'd seen a ghost. "Commander," Lieutenant Daewon called out, his voice shaky, "you need to hear this." Yuki walked over, coffee mug in hand, expecting another complaint from the mining crews about delayed supply runs. New Geneva wasn't exactly the most exciting. Posting in the galaxy. It was a simple orbital station above a farming world that most people had never heard of. Nothing interesting ever happened here. That's when she saw it. Through the main viewport, something was approaching that shouldn't exist. The ship moved like it was dancing through space, its hull shifting and flowing like liquid metal. Light bent around it in ways that made her eyes water, creating rainbow patterns that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Every spacer in the galaxy knew what ships looked like. Nexari vessels were all sharp angles and glowing engines. Zephyrian. Craft had those weird organic curves that looked like they'd been grown instead of built. Collective ships were massive and blocky, built for function over beauty. This thing looked like someone had taken a piece of the Aurora and taught it to fly. New Geneva Control, this is Captain Minho requesting docking permission. Yuki nearly choked on her coffee. The voice came through crystal clear on all channels, speaking perfect galactic standard. But underneath the words there was something else, an accent she hadn't heard since her great-grandmother used to sing lullabies when Yuki was little. "Sir," whispered Ensign Bora from the sensor station, "the ship's not showing up properly on our scans. It's like it's only half there." Yuki set down her mug with trembling hands. Her great-grandmother used to tell stories about the old language, the one their family spoke before they learned Galactic Standard. Korean, she had called it. But that was 3 generations ago. Nobody spoke Korean anymore. So why did Captain Minho's voice sound like home? "This is New Geneva Control," Yuki managed to say, her training taking over even as her mind raced. "Please identify your vessel and state your business. We are the Eternal Dawn, returning from a long journey. We seek permission to dock and reconnect with our distant family." The way he said family made something twist in Yuki's chest. There was weight behind that word, like it carried meanings she couldn't quite grasp. "Commander," Lieutenant Daewon was practically vibrating with excitement. "Look at these readings. Their ship is generating more power than our entire station, but it's completely clean. No radiation, no waste heat, nothing harmful." That's when Telvar, the Zephyrian liaison assigned to their station, started making worried clicking sounds. His crystalline features were flickering rapidly, which Yuki had learned meant he was either very excited or very scared. "I cannot read them," Telvar whispered, his 4 eyes wide with something approaching panic. "Their minds are protected, shielded. This should not be possible." Zephyrians could read anyone's thoughts if they tried hard enough. It was what made them so good at keeping order in the galaxy. The idea that someone could block their mental probes was like saying water wasn't wet. "Maybe they're just really good at meditation," suggested Ensign Bora helpfully. Telvar's expression suggested that meditation had nothing to do with it. More ships began appearing around the Eternal Dawn, not arriving in the usual flash of hyperspace engines, but simply materializing like they had always been there. Each one was beautiful in a way that made the station's crew stop what they were doing and stare. "How many are there?" Yuki asked. 17, no, 23. They keep appearing." Lieutenant Daewon's voice was getting higher with each count. "Commander, some of these ships are bigger than dreadnoughts, but they're barely registering on our mass detectors." Captain Minho's voice came through again, patient and calm. "New Geneva Control, we understand this may be overwhelming. We have been away for a very long time. Perhaps we could send a small delegation to meet with your leadership?" Yuki looked around her control room. Everyone was staring at her, waiting for orders. The problem was, she had no idea what orders to give. This wasn't covered in any manual she'd ever read. "Captain Minho," she said slowly, "may I ask where you've been traveling from?" There was a pause that seemed to last forever. "From beyond the rim, Commander. We left this galaxy 50,000 years ago, and now we have returned. We have much to share with our brothers and sisters who remained behind." The control room went dead silent. Even the usual background hum of the station's systems seemed to quiet down, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. 50,000 years ago, humans had been a young species, just learning to travel between stars. The Galactics Council didn't even exist yet. The idea that any group of humans had possessed the technology to leave the galaxy entirely was impossible, but the ships floating outside their station suggested that maybe impossible things happened more often than anyone thought. Dr. Sora had always been proud of her laboratory. For 30 years she had worked tirelessly in the sterile white halls of the Collective Medical Center, trying to solve the greatest mystery of her people. The hive mind that connected all members of the collective was slowly dying, and no one knew why. The symptoms had started appearing about 500 years ago. Individual collective members would suddenly lose their connection to the group consciousness. They would stand there, confused and alone, like someone had suddenly cut off their ability to hear or see. Within days, they would fall into a coma and die. It was happening more and more frequently now. Entire worlds of collective members had gone silent. Their great queens, the massive beings who served as the central hubs of their hive mind network, were shutting down one by one. The doctors estimated that the entire collective species would be extinct within a generation. Sora had dedicated her life to finding a cure. She had studied brain patterns, analyzed genetic sequences, and built computer models that could simulate the collective's neural networks. Nothing worked. The degradation seemed to be built into their very evolution. Then the humans came back. Doctor Hyun walked into Sora's lab like she owned the place, carrying a simple tablet and wearing clothes that looked ordinary, but somehow seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. She appeared to be in her 30s, but when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had lived for centuries. "Your problem is actually quite simple," Dr. Hyun said, settling into a chair across from Sora's desk. "Your species evolved too quickly. Your minds grew faster than your brains could handle." Sora bristled. She had heard this theory before from other scientists, and it never led anywhere useful. "That's impossible. Evolution doesn't work that way." Dr. Hyun smiled, and Sora felt something shift in the air around them. "Evolution works exactly that way when you're dealing with a hive mind species. Think about it. Every time your population grew, every time you added new members to the collective consciousness, you were essentially upgrading your mental capacity. But your individual brains stayed the same size." She pulled up a holographic display that showed the collective's neural network in ways Sora had never seen before. The connections between individual minds were visible as streams of light, pulsing with information. "See these bottlenecks?" Dr. Hyun pointed to spots where the light streams seemed to bunch up and slow down. "Your individual brains are trying to process information from millions of other minds simultaneously. You're basically running supercomputer software on hardware that was designed for a pocket calculator." Sora leaned forward, fascinated despite herself. "So what's the solution?" "We teach your brains to handle the load. It's not about changing your hardware, it's about upgrading your software." Over the next 3 days, Dr. Hyun worked with Sora and her team to implement changes that seemed almost magical. They weren't using any technology that Sora could recognize. Instead, Dr. Hyun seemed to be teaching the collective members mental exercises, ways of thinking that allowed their brains to process the hive mind connections more efficiently. The results were immediate and stunning. Queen Zarathul, who had been comatose for 6 months, suddenly opened her massive eyes and began singing the deep harmonic songs that served as the collective's primary form of communication. Within hours, thousands of collective members across the galaxy were reconnecting to the hive mind, but the humans weren't stopping there. On the Zephyrian homeworld, Commander Nara was working with the planet's most powerful psychics. The Zephyrians had always been proud of their mental abilities, but they had reached a plateau centuries ago. Their telepathic powers seemed to have natural limits that no amount of training could overcome. Commander Nara changed that in a single afternoon. "You're thinking about this all wrong," she explained to Master Telvok, the Zephyrians' greatest psychic teacher. "You're trying to push your thoughts outward, like shouting across a crowded room. Instead, try pulling the universe inward." The EB Mental discipline she taught seemed simple, almost childish. But when Master Telvok tried it, his psychic abilities exploded tenfold. He could suddenly read minds across continents, move objects that weighed tons, and even peek into possible futures. Meanwhile, Captain Tay was revolutionizing Nexari manufacturing on their industrial worlds. The Nexari had always been the galaxy's master engineers, but their technology was reaching its limits. Physics itself seemed to be putting a ceiling on what they could achieve. Captain Tay showed them how to think beyond those limits. "You're still thinking in 3 dimensions," he explained to Chief Engineer Vortak. "But space itself has 11 dimensions. Once you learn to build in all of them, these limitations disappear." The new manufacturing techniques he shared allowed the Nexari to create materials that were stronger than neutron star matter, engines that could fold space like origami, and computers that could think faster than the speed of light. Within weeks, the entire galaxy was buzzing with news of these impossible advances. The Galactic Council called an emergency session demanding answers. Councillor Zexrath, a massive reptilian being who had ruled the Council for over 1,000 years, slammed his fist on the great table. "How is this possible? How can a species that disappeared 50,000 years ago suddenly return with technology that makes ours look like stone tools?" Ambassador Kang sat calmly at the center of the council chamber, surrounded by representatives from hundreds of species. His simple human appearance seemed almost boring compared to the exotic aliens around him, but everyone in the room could feel the quiet power radiating from him. "The answer is simple," he said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the vast chamber. "We had time, 50,000 years beyond the galactic rim, watching your progress, learning from your mistakes, and preparing for this moment." He gestured to a holographic display that showed the galaxy from an impossible perspective, as if viewed from outside its spiral arms. "We never truly left you behind. We've been guardians, observers, teachers, waiting for the right moment to return. And now that moment has come." The Grand Council chamber had never seen anything quite like this moment. For over 49,000 years, it had been the center of galactic power, where the fate of countless worlds was decided by beings who considered themselves the natural rulers of civilization. Supreme Councillor Vorthak dominated the chamber, like a living mountain. His species, the Korthani, had evolved on a high-gravity world where only the strongest survived. Standing nearly 12 feet tall with skin like armor plating and eyes that glowed with inner fire, he was used to getting his way through sheer intimidation. Today he was facing down a single human woman who barely came up to his chest. Admiral Hannah looked almost comically small, standing in the center of the massive chamber. She wore simple clothes that seemed to be made of ordinary fabric, though they somehow never wrinkled or showed any signs of wear. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried no weapons, no badges of rank, nothing that would normally command respect in this room full of galactic power brokers. But every being in that chamber could feel something radiating from her, a quiet confidence that suggested she knew something they didn't. "Your species has been away for 50,000 years, Vorthak's voice boomed through the chamber, causing some of the smaller delegates to cover their ears. "In that time, we have established order. We have created laws. We have built a civilization that spans the galaxy. You cannot simply return and ignore the systems we have put in place." The other council members nodded in agreement. Councillor Thexara of the Zephyrians leaned forward, her crystalline features glowing with barely contained psychic energy. "The territorial agreements alone took us 3,000 years to negotiate. Entire star systems have been assigned based on species compatibility and resource requirements. You cannot expect us to simply reorganize everything because you have decided to come home." Admiral Hannah listened patiently to each complaint, each demand, each threat. Her expression never changed from that gentle, almost amused smile. When the council finally fell silent, waiting for her response, she said just one word: "Observe." The chamber's holographic displays, normally used to show star charts and treaty documents, suddenly came alive with something none of them had ever seen before. It started with a dead world in the Outer Rim territories. Kepler 442b had been written off centuries ago as uninhabitable. Its atmosphere was toxic, its surface was scarred by asteroid impacts, and its magnetic field had failed long ago, leaving it exposed to deadly cosmic radiation. As they watched, massive machines descended from orbit. But these weren't the crude terraforming platforms that the galaxy's engineers had been using for millennia. These devices seemed to dance as they worked, moving with an elegance that suggested they were as much art as technology. Within hours, the planet's dead atmosphere began to change. Poisonous gases transformed into breathable air. The scarred surface smoothed itself out, revealing rich soil underneath. Oceans began to form in the low-lying areas, their waters crystal clear and teeming with microscopic life. "Impossible," whispered Chief Engineer Mordak of the Nexari. "Terraforming takes centuries. We've run the calculations 1,000 times. The energy requirements alone would drain the power of an entire star system, but the displays showed dozens of other worlds undergoing the same transformation. Planets that had been considered worthless were blooming with life in a matter of hours. Moons that had never held atmosphere were suddenly sprouting forests, and then the space habitats began to unfold. They appeared like flowers opening to the sun, massive structures that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever built. Each one was beautiful in its own way, with flowing lines that seemed to follow natural patterns rather than engineering blueprints. The smallest of them could house millions of beings in comfort. The largest could accommodate entire civilizations. "Where did they come from?" demanded Councillor Yexoth, her insectoid features clicking with agitation. "Our deep space sensors detected nothing. No construction fleets, no resource-gathering operations, nothing." Admiral Hana's smile widened slightly. "We don't build things the way you do. We grow them. We dream them into existence. We work with the fundamental forces of the universe rather than against them." She gestured, and the displays changed again. This time they showed scenes that made the council chamber erupt in shocked gasps and angry shouts. The Andromeda Cascade event of 47,823. Every school child in the galaxy learned about it in their history classes. A chain reaction of stellar collapses that would have wiped out entire sectors of the galaxy, stopped mysteriously just before it reached populated systems. The official explanation was that it had simply burned itself out naturally. The displays showed the truth. Human ships appearing from nowhere, working together to contain the cascading destruction. Technology beyond anything the galaxy possessed, used quietly and efficiently to save billions of lives. The Void Plague of 45,156. A mysterious disease that had threatened to consume all organic matter in its path suddenly disappeared without explanation. Again, the displays showed human intervention. Medical techniques that seemed to work on a fundamental level, healing not just individual patients, but reality itself. Dozens of other disasters, prevented or contained by humans working from the shadows. Wars that ended when key leaders suddenly developed wisdom they'd never shown before. Famines that ended when new agricultural techniques appeared overnight. Plagues that burned out just before they could spread beyond control. "How you've been watching us," accused Councillor Zexrath, his scaled hide flushing with anger. "Manipulating us, controlling us from behind the scenes." "Protecting you," Admiral Hana corrected gently. "Guiding you when necessary, but never controlling. Every choice your species made was your own. Every achievement, every discovery, every moment of growth came from within your own hearts and minds." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each council member in turn. "We could have returned at any time in the past 50,000 years. We had the power to simply take whatever we wanted, to impose our will on a galaxy that had forgotten we existed. But that's not who we are. That's not who we became during our long journey in the dark." Supreme Councillor Vorthak's massive fist slammed down on his platform, cracking the reinforced stone. "Then what do you want? Why return now?" Admiral Hana's expression grew serious for the first time since she'd entered the chamber. "Because it's time for the galaxy to grow up. You've spent 50,000 years learning to survive, to compete, to divide resources and territory among yourselves. You've done well, but survival isn't enough anymore. It's time to learn how to truly live." The displays changed one final time, showing a vision that took every being's breath away. The galaxy transformed not through conquest or force, but through cooperation. Species working together not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. Technology shared freely, wisdom passed down without reservation, and conflicts resolved through understanding rather than violence. This is what we offer, Admiral Hanna said softly. Not submission to our authority, but partnership in a future beyond anything you've imagined. The choice, as always, is yours. President Day had never imagined she would be standing in front of representatives from over 1,000 different species, but here she was. The new Unity Hall had been built in just 3 weeks, using human construction techniques that still seemed like magic to most of the galaxy. Unlike the old Galactic Council chamber, with its intimidating architecture designed to make visitors feel small, this space felt warm and welcoming. The hall curved in gentle spirals that seemed to flow naturally upward, with perfect acoustics that let every word carry clearly to every corner without amplification. Soft light filtered down from panels that looked like captured starlight, and the air itself seemed to hum with peaceful energy. Representatives from species that had been enemies for centuries sat side by side, talking quietly among themselves. The Zephyrians' crystalline forms sparkled next to the flowing organic shapes of the collective delegates. Nexari engineers compared notes with human scientists, their old rivalry forgotten in the face of shared discovery. President Day looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some completely alien to human eyes. 3 months ago, she had been just another human colonial administrator on a farming world that most people had never heard of. Now she had been chosen to speak for humanity as they offered to reshape the entire galaxy. "Friends," she began, and somehow that simple word seemed to settle over the crowd like a warm blanket. "We stand at a crossroads. For 50,000 years, this galaxy has been divided. Species competing for resources, fighting over territory, building walls between worlds and peoples." She gestured to the holographic displays that showed the current state of galactic civilization. Border disputes, trade wars, entire sectors where different species refused to communicate with each other. It was a map of division and mistrust. "We have returned not to add another voice to this chaos, but to offer something different. We propose, not dominion but partnership, not conquest but cooperation. We offer our knowledge freely, our protection willingly, and our friendship unconditionally." The response was mixed. Many delegates leaned forward, interested and hopeful. Others sat back with expressions of suspicion or outright hostility. Change was never easy, especially for species that had spent millennia learning to see others as competitors or threats. Elder Korvash of the Threnodi Empire rose to speak. His people were old, proud, and had never forgotten the human colonies that had once prospered in what they now considered their territory. "Pretty words," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "But how do we know this isn't just another form of conquest? You return with impossible technology and ask us to trust you. History is full of conquerors who spoke of friendship. President." Day nodded respectfully. "Your caution is wise, Elder Korvash. Trust must be earned, not demanded. We ask only for the chance to prove our intentions through our actions." But not everyone was willing to wait and see. 3 days after the Unity Hall gathering, the hegemony of Korthax made their decision. War leader Brutos had built his entire career on the principle that strength was the only currency that mattered in the galaxy. The idea of these returning humans offering gifts and friendship struck him as weakness that needed to be crushed before it spread. His fleet was massive by galactic standards, 200 warships, each one bristling with weapons that could crack planets. They had conquered 17 star systems in the past century, and their military technology was considered among the most advanced in the galaxy. They struck at dawn, targeting the human colony of New Busan. It was a peaceful world where humans had been working with local species to develop new agricultural techniques, the perfect target to send a message about what happened to those who challenged the established order. The attack lasted exactly 17 minutes. Brutos watched in growing confusion as his most powerful weapons simply passed through the human settlements like they were firing at ghosts. Energy beams that should have leveled cities created pretty light shows but did no damage. Kinetic projectiles that could punch through starship armor bounced off invisible barriers like soap bubbles. "Sir," his weapons officer reported with obvious panic. "Our targeting systems are showing hits, but there's no damage. It's like we're shooting at holographs." Then the human response came. No weapons fire, no return attacks, nothing that resembled traditional warfare. Instead, Bruthos found his entire fleet suddenly floating in empty space at the edge of the Korthax home system. Every weapon had been disabled, not destroyed but simply turned off like someone had flipped a switch. His crews were unharmed but thoroughly shaken. A gentle voice came over the communication channels. "Captain June of the human vessel." Peaceful Dawn spoke with the same calm tone someone might use to discuss the weather. "War leader. Brutos, your crews are safe and your ships are undamaged. We have disabled your weapon systems temporarily as a precautionary measure. When you are ready to talk rather than fight, we will be happy to discuss any concerns your people might have." Bruthos stared at his instruments in disbelief. His flagship's sensors couldn't even detect where the human ship was located. It was as if the voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The news of the hegemony's failed attack spread across the galaxy within hours. Other species that had been considering their own preemptive strikes suddenly found themselves reconsidering. If the galaxy's most feared military power could be neutralized so easily and peacefully, what hope did anyone else have? But rather than creating fear, the incident had the opposite effect. Species that had been sitting on the fence began to see that the humans meant what they said about offering friendship rather than demanding submission. Commander Yuki, now serving as a liaison between human and galactic forces, found herself busier than she had ever imagined possible. Every day brought new requests for cooperation, new opportunities for shared research, new friendships forming between species that had been strangers or enemies for centuries. The old Galactic Council officially dissolved 6 months later, not through force or revolution, but through simple irrelevance. Why cling to a system based on competition and division when cooperation offered so much more? The new cooperative federation grew naturally, like a garden tended by caring hands. Each species contributed what they could and received what they needed. The Zephyrians shared their mental disciplines, the collective offered their organizational abilities, the Nexari provided their engineering expertise, and humans served as guides and teachers for a galaxy learning to reach its full potential. Standing in the observation lounge of the Federation's newest space station, President Day watched ships from hundreds of worlds dock together in perfect harmony. Children of different species played together in the station's parks, learning each other's languages and customs. Scientists worked side by side on projects that would have been impossible when the galaxy was divided. "Welcome home," she whispered, to herself, watching the stars beyond the viewport. The galaxy had finally learned what humans had discovered 50,000 years ago during their long journey in the dark between galaxies. The greatest strength wasn't in conquering others, but in lifting them up. And together they would reach heights none of them could have achieved alone.